good, I think. I want to, because I think plenty of us already know Scourge, so I just quickly want to go for the weapon skills and the utility skills as a refresher. Um, then a bit of traits, and then on the topics that I mentioned in the training, like the interpretation of things and how we want to sync up. And I want to spend most of my time there. And then I have
Okay.
some hope to summarize with some key takeaways. So if everybody can see my screen or can join me on the outskirts of the base, or basically on pink tech. So in our guild build, as you're aware, it has been changed. We're running a combination of Scepter Dagger
Hello.
and X Focus. If you want to swap around the X Focus or Scepter Focus, something like that, if you want to swap those around, that's fine. It's up to personal preference, but the skills that we have access to with these weapons are critical, so make sure we have those. From the left to the right on the weapon skills, you have your auto attack, which just fills in gaps if you have any. You have a grasping death, which is the second scepter skill, which cripples, which is always really good and just does some AoE damage. Use it as a nice filler. On the third skill, you have Devouring Darkness, which is basically, I would say, the skill that comes off cooldown every time. Whenever you have it, you use it. To me, it's the most powerful skill you have in your weapon skills. It corrupts a lot of conditions on multiple targets, and the range is quite rather impressive, I would say. So just to make sure that it lands. I mean, you have a lot of people just when we're running around and we just press like 3 and then hoping something will hit, and it will not hit. But this one must hit, right? So whenever we're engaging or something like that, make sure the little bar on the red, it's really silly that I'm saying it, but the little red bar is gone, like here, and then you can cast it. Make sure it hits. It hits like a trunk, and it prioritizes Boon Corrupt, which is the bread and butter of our squad composition, is the Boon Corrupt. The fourth skill, and we'll talk about this one a bit more later. The fourth one is very little damage blindness on a single target or 3 targets with some bounces. It's not a good skill. I rarely use it. And your 5 is a 1 second delay AoE Boon Corrupt. So that's also with some light damage, I would say. So those are your Scepter and your Dagger skills. I personally run an AoE set. That's true. That's right, Shinko. Thanks. This is also a little bit of a condition transfer, if it lands indeed. I personally prefer to have an AoE set and a single focus set. Shinko combines the two, or swaps the two around, as I just said, so that he always has some AoE and always has some single target. I generally walk in with this set and then move into this set whenever we're sort of focusing targets. First one is again an auto attack that applies vulnerability. It's an okay skill with the single target damage is rather okay. But make sure that second skill is, don't use the first skill if your second skill is off cooldown. It's a very powerful skill on single target. The second skill on your X, together with your Spinal Shivers, which we'll talk about in a bit, is almost a one shot on people. I mean, this is not a good example, but there's no boons, etc. But this is it's a powerful combination. The third skill on your X is also a Boon Corrupt, so which has a slightly lower range than your Scepter Free, which has a 900 range, and this is a 600 range. But it again is a 5 target Boon Corrupt. So again, whenever you are in range, and 600 range is not that long, I mean, the River Drake right now is on 600 range, so this is short, right? So everything up from me until the River Drake, that's gonna get a chance to being hit by the unholy burst and feast. So this is it's a good skill, but make sure that it lands the same as where we do target selection here. Just make sure that this one is in range, because if you use it, if you're slightly off, it doesn't do anything. And you can see it's a circle, right? So it's 600 range around you, which makes it ideal when you're exchanging positions or these kinds of things. The fourth skill, the Soul Grasp, is a vulnerability, a good vulnerability application, a good life force. Has a 1200 range, which makes it good to use in some points, because the focus skills have the longest range. But it's also single target, and it's also a rather slow projectile. So I don't use it too often. We'll talk about skill prioritization a bit later. Micro's there. Maybe you can invite him. Sash, to your question, do you use the focus at range as we engage or as a finisher? I use it as a finisher. Shinko uses it as we engage as a starting weapon set. So because if we sometimes poke, you can use these skills, and the Spinal Shivers does have a lot of Boon Corrupt. I think this is the best single target skill you have, and it's a 1200 range skill, but again, the cast time is rather long. It's almost a second. It is a second. So people sometimes they dodge, so it's not always the case that it hits, but if it does. The 5, yeah, I'm not sure whether you need it, but you would want it, because it's better to sort of focus the target and then just randomly pushing buttons, because that's also one of the key takeaways I want people to have, is that the target selection on basically your main skills, the 3 on Scepter, the 5 and the 4 and the 2 is really important, because that's how you focus, right? I mean, you can just randomly push it, but if it's about converting downs, which sometimes is called, you need to select those targets. And I mean, you don't want to just randomly press this skill and then maybe it lands somewhere because you tapped a bit or you switch targets. It lands somewhere at you want it to hit where the spike lands, right? Where the commander is calling it. So selecting targets is really something I want people to take away from this session. That can massively improve your boon rip. When I started doing that, and it has not been too long ago, but I just did see an increase in boon rips because they just land better, right? They just do something rather than just disappearing in thin air. So that's basically the weapon skills. Any questions, just drop them in chat or wait until the end. Utility skills, we know the functionality of the most, we know them. Allow me to comment a bit on them. Is that our Sand Flare is an important barrier, which also converts boons to conditions. You can use it while exchanging positions as a boon corrupt, or you can use it up front of an engage to give us a little bit of extra health. I mean, a 10% health increase doesn't see much, but if it's on a party of 5, imagine the 2.5k, it's just 12.5k extra health that we're having as a squad. So do the maths and you'll see why it's worth precasting that. The Trail of Anguish is something I really want to focus on a bit, because this is not only your oh shit button, it is also a non-capped boon corrupt. I mean, just the trail that you're making corrupts boons. And it's important to know that this is very powerful and it's non-capped. I mean, dodging through an enemy group with this skill on gives them an entire road of boon corrupts, and they do it per pulse for 6 seconds. But on an unlimited amount of people. Imagine that being done by 3 or 4 Scourges. I mean, that's 3 boon corrupts per second. And that's something that we really can work on, is not necessarily using this as an oh shit button, but trusting the supports and the firebrands to make sure that we can use this offensively, because that is where a lot of corrupts can be created from. So this is really something that I want to have it as a takeaway, like try out in raids to see how far you can go with not using Trail of Anguish defensively as your oh shit button, because it's really tempting to, if you're stunned, immediately press E and dodge back twice. I mean, I do that too sometimes, but the amount of offensive power this skill has is insane, and using it like that, while maybe they're not in range or not properly evaluating the situation before you're hitting the oh shit button, is something that really takes a bit of an edge out of your offensive capabilities. The yeah, and that what Shinko says is also true. The wells. The wells are always being called. Everybody knows, I think here knows their wells. We have a well of suffering, which does damage and vulnerability, and we have a well of corruption, which corrupts boons. I mean, this also hitting this properly is something that we also need to take heed of. We do that. It's also unblockable, so that helps. But make sure that hits and that you always press your well of corruption first. People know, I think here, know the functionality of the wells. So going over placement and doing it in front of the enemy is really important, but people know that. And that takes practice and experience to do that properly. So just, well, if there's any questions, just drop them in chat. But otherwise, I just want to leave it as is, because people know, I think, on Scourge that wells are important, and we run well of suffering and well of corruption. Then Ghastly Breach, which is also a very good skill with a very high cooldown, has a long cost time, and but is really, really powerful if synced properly. I mean, there's about a, what is it, 300 range radius where there's a boon corrupt every pulse. If you see these going around, you'll see that together with some Trail of Anguish or something, the boon corrupts will be insane in the spot. This will allow for insane boon corruptions, which you cannot and will not out boon again. You will not regenerate your boons as quickly as we corrupt them with all these skills on. So the offensive power and the placement of these skills is very important. And as I'm not sure how you followed whether you guys all followed the discussions on the composition of the squad, but our main task of Scourges is gonna be boon corrupt. So these skills, Wealth Corruption, Ghastly Breach, and Trail of Anguish, they're super good, but make sure to hit. And this is what sometimes you will always have a wrong placement, or you will also have need your oh shit button, but just make sure that that you know this is important. So these are like the utility skills. Then I want to talk really quickly about about trades. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but just the ones that have some increased functionality. And I really want to emphasize Spite Free, which is basically whenever you enter Shroud, and pay attention that entering Shroud is Desert Shroud, which is this skill. This is entering Shroud. It will pop Spiteful Spirit, which again, if you can read the description, is again an area of effect 600 range, boon corrupt. So please make sure that this one is on, and that you know that this one syncs with that one. I mean, this is really also sort of something that people tend to forget, that you have impact over when this Grandmaster trait pops, and it's a strong Grandmaster trait. So just wanted to get it out there. The other one that I wanted to talk about is that Path of Corruption, which is your curse's master trait, is when your nefarious favor, it also boon corrupts. So that's also another boon corrupt that you have as an option. Now those are the items that I quickly wanted to go through. I mean, the Scourge's trades is just, I mean, There's giving barrier to people. There's having sand shades up to twice. There's a very small burning damage, which is not important, and a bit of self-sustain that's being caused by extra corruption. So the more corrupts, the more you are rewarded with extra boons, and we all love boons. So that's the Scourge trade line, and the other ones are just they are there, and I want you to remember the spite 3 and the curses 2 and the effects they have on your skill bars. Now, I've purposefully left out the shades because I want to talk about them in conjunction with spiking. But before that, does anybody have any questions on weapon skills or traits that we're running and why? They are such. Okay, then let's talk about shades. There are let's talk about spikes and then we'll integrate shades because can you guys ping the skills that you would use when we're spiking? When Shinko or Mech is saying spike? Anything else? I also use Devouring Darkness in my spikes. We need to make sure it hits, but again, they're both boon corrupts, they both do a lot of damage, and they have a really short cooldown. I mean, it has a 10 seconds cooldown, so make sure that when you're doing spikes and when you're in range, this one is the first to be off cooldown. Exactly what Shinko said. I think, and that's I haven't tested it or something, but I think this is your most valuable weapon skill. So for me, it's always off cooldown because 5 boon corrupts at a 900 range and then in a 360-degree radius with a lot of damage, 871. I mean that's just checking. It's the highest damaging skill set if you run the combination of Scepter Dagger. So spiking is indeed Grasping Dead, Devouring Darkness, and Enfeebling Blood. Now there's another thing that we can do at 900 range, which is putting down spikes, or shades. And the shades, they go also at 900 range. What do you mean, Sash, with range spike only? Yeah, and what do you mean, like, um, uh, yeah, so, okay, that's a good question. I personally use Scepter Dagger and then X Focus, and I, basically when we're at range spiking, I tend to use Grasping Dead, Enfeebling Blood, Enfeebling Blood and Devouring Darkness and Shades. And that's the ranged spike. When we're engaging in melee, we generally start off with some smaller range. So I tend to use Unholy Feast, extra shades, all this utility stuff, and then start focusing off people with 2 and 5, and sometimes 4. So, and then normally you can swap back again to the next set, and then you just roll through the skill prioritization, because being all skills are more or less ranged, apart from the Unholy Feats, they are more or less at 900 range or larger. So we can use them whenever. Yeah, burst targets, I would say. Single targets. I mean, when we focus, I mean, you have the situations where you walk through an enemy squad and there's like 2 or 3 downs. I use then 2 and 4 and 5 to focus it down. So spiking indeed 2, 3, 5 and shades. Now let's talk a bit about shades. Shades is we have 3 shades, and something we're gonna want to integrate, and that's something that our genius leader Shinko has thought of. All the credit to him. Is that Shade is an very quick cast skill, which also does a bit of damage. And what happens if you do damage? The Aegis that is being precasted drops off. So before hitting Shades, or before hitting your powerful Devouring Darkness and Enfeebling Blood, if every Scourge that we're having uses 1 Shade, which is I think 2 or 3 targets skill. I don't know really if it's 2 or 3, maybe someone else knows. But it removes the Aegis. And if you combine that with a Shade, and then directly after that you're gonna be casting your second skill, then you also have a Boon Corrupt and more damage. So spiking for me, let me go over the skill rotation I'm using, is cast a Shade, cast F2, select a target, press 3, press 5, press 2. And I couldn't cast my 3. So that's basically what we can use. Now, to further talk about shades, because I think that's some of the most underutilized due to the Puerto Rico. Is one of the most underutilized skills we have in our set. I mean, this skill can be almost directly put down together with this one, which is just basically 3 Boon Corrupts, because whenever you're engaging, you have a full life force anyway. This one can also be off cooldown. You can even think yeah, they sync up really nicely, those two. So basically use that often. Put down the Shade, put down F2, and then hit again. Another thing that we're gonna can use is the F5, but beware that that is a very long cooldown, and it's also very strong. It provides also a bit of barrier. Again, it provides 2k barrier, which is 10k health for your party. But this one is also in a 600 range around you and your Shade. So like, if you're like really on point on a specific raid day, and you can read the enemy movements and they're walking like to the river or something, you're gonna be placing them right here, and then another one here in the around the cooldown, and exactly when they walk, you can pop the F5. I mean, you saw them glaring up, right? So then basically you're hitting a lot of your Grandmaster Freight. So that's something you can use. A better or a more easier way of using it is that whenever you're dodge rolling, you can basically dodge roll and then press all your shades. I mean, you can press their instant, so you can just put them down. Exactly. Shinka summarizes it nicely. So be aware that whenever you're exchanging position, you are dodge rolling. I mean, if you cast all your shades in the meanwhile, you are just a massive rolling Boon Corrupt, and you also are effective during your rolls. And that too. So these are really powerful, and I think looking at the shades that are underground, we as War Squad, everyone is underutilizing them. Especially the Aegis removal effect of it. I think we can improve that. So let's and that can be integrated in the spike. So if we all start doing that, we're gonna be dropping a lot of Aegis, and we're gonna be landing our Boon Corrupts a lot better. Sure, you can drop your unpopular opinion. Yeah, that's true. I mean, whenever you do the Condi Scourge build, that is so strong in the current meta. You combine Blood is Power with the F5 of your skill set, which triggers one of the traits we are using right now, which is this one. This is we also run this, but basically that's by lack of a better option. It's really hard to land and to utilize. I mean, it's condition cleanse, but it does help you understand that they are there and how powerful they can be, because it's then at that point of time it's the bread and butter of your build, because without the exactly it can help. But for the raids, I would really love if we can just all start popping F1 F2. I mean, you saw it glaring up again. I mean, if we can all do that, that's already 6 or 7 boon corrupts just with the push of an extra boon corrupt we're having. Having talked about the spikes in the shades, I think that's again. I'm gonna start repeating myself a little bit right now, but as a takeaway for all the Scourges that were here, if we can do the F1, F2 one, and we can use Thrill of Anguish aggressively rather than defensively, I think we will step up our game quite a bit already. If you even add like target selection, like in your scepter set, on your skill 3 and your 5 and your 2 and your 4, we're gonna be taking it even a bigger step. Now, the last thing that I really want to talk about, because then I've already been talking for half an hour, which I think is already something that is a bit about the max span of attention people have, just listening, is the big bombs. And as just Shinko sometimes defines it, at your feet, is what he says. Basically, that is the call to, depending on whether you're range or melee, to drop your wells. Again, always drop corruption first and then Soul of Suffering. And I did it wrong because I let them fully overlap, and you ideally want to have them a bit like not fully overlapping, but more in the sort of the way of moving of the enemy squad. So yeah, they're on recharge now, but you see them in here, you see them in a better placement than I did. So that is the big bomb or the wells. And something that I would really love to see is people calling out using the wells, because one well by its lonesome is not strong. I mean, of course, it does a bit of damage, but that's easily out-healed by scrappers if you're just one. The power of the wells is the combination of both well-placed corruption first and then a well of suffering on top of that, synchronized. Because then you don't have a pulsing 2.5k damage, but you have a pulsing 2.5 times the people that are casting it, and then it's gonna hurt. So syncing that up is really important. So, and I want to repeat myself, this callouts, this is where a bit of the DPS and the effectiveness as a squad can come into play. So I would really appreciate, and I can't force anyone, but would really appreciate more people starting to call out using their wells. Basically, that same applies for breach, right? I mean, I was just talking a bit about like the big bombs at range, because this is a 900 range kills. But very often we will be in a situation where you are either clashing. I would say just wells down or wells out, wells. And then for the breaches, the same would apply. Just bridges down. I say bridges down, but that doesn't say that just bridges isn't enough. I mean, the big part about breaches is that it's a skill that's being cast on you, on your character, and It's not a range skill, so just be aware of that. Probably that's obvious for a lot of us, but just want to make sure that everybody knows that. And aggressive placement of breaches is really complex. Takes a lot of feel. It requires you to really know your class well. But if you land it, it can be so goddamn satisfying to see basically your strips. They go like a rat, and that's a good feeling. So um, there can be like two scenarios where you expect an exchange of positions, and you already cast it while you're in the safety of your squad. Exactly, Shinko. That's a good addition. And so when you're exchanging position, you can already do it in the cast it in the safety of your squad, knowing that they will roll into it. I would say that there's like 1 or 2 seconds wasted of the entire thing at the point they're running in. If you want to have, if you're really feeling confident, and I feel that we can play around that with that a bit more, is like get into the way of them while you have sufficient stacks of stability, etc., etc. If you can keep track on that, get in the way of them, cast it, and then just Trail of Anguish through them. That will provide insane boon rips. If you can join these together, you will also have some stability to get out. But that is, I think, a bit of a discussion on the breaches. Whenever a big bomb is asked at our feet, I would say, if you're confident, you know when we're gonna be clashing, then you can use it at your own judgment. But if you're not, wait for calls, because I generally think, and this is not something against like the commanders, but I think the call of the breaches is generally a bit on the later side because we have a cast time, and you want them to move through it and not like on the back tail of it. Yeah, Shinko does that. He just says breaches because he thinks people are on it. Yeah, and in that sense, we, if the commander asks for it specifically in these kinds of situations, the commander does feel like they're on us and they're stealthed. If you're very sure they are not, don't use them. But otherwise, I would say listen to the commander because everybody will be spiking on that position. Yeah, exactly, Kuro. I mean, they get called sometimes, and then I also just hold them in. But I mean, if you see like 1 or 2 people moving very boldly into your squad and they're calling it, just drop them. I mean, but then talk about it, right? I mean, you can after the fight and say, provide the feedback, you called breaches too soon, or I dropped my breaches on your call and I didn't have them in the fight, so that did not help corrupt. Or you can just say it by drop breaches so that they will know it is not no longer available. And it all comes back to doing the call outs. I mean, if the commander hears 4 people calling breaches, I mean, they know they don't have breaches anymore. And also, the DPS knows that, hey, fuck, my Scourge is right now doing the highest boon corrupt skills he has in his assortment, so I should do some damage. I mean, throw it all out. Whatever you have. Dragon Hunter traps, face smash, and these kinds of things, they all need to pop at that point of time. So it helps people letting. Basically, you're saying, hey guys, I've prepared the enemy composition for damage. That's basically what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. So that's yeah, exactly. And so that's in big bomb. It means basically everything you have in terms of utility that is in range. So please don't use breaches if somebody says big bomb if they're still at 600 range. Just keep it. Also, please don't use Trail of Anguish because that's also something that you need to be on for. But if you have a good Trail of Anguish or a good breach in an exchanging positions situation, just call them out. And I think if we just call them out right now, I think we'll get a lot closer in terms of when we're using them and knit together a bit more. And I think that will really help sort of also identifying like who's early, who's late. Are we using them on time? Do we need to whittle them down a bit more before we cast them? Do we use them on the first engage? Do we want to do that? Do we don't do it? These kinds of questions can then be sort of more drilled down into, and I think that will also increase the effectiveness of Scourges. But that starts with people calling them out consistently. And that's something that I really want to emphasize as well.
There's the
So, as a
other
summary,
side that Nash mentioned as well, which is calling your timers, which is probably just as
exactly,
important, right? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Mac talks about communication a lot, and I think we don't do that enough. I need to do it more as well. But the considerations on why we're calling them is to prepare to say to to the DPSers, hey guys, they're ready for damage. They can be cooked, right? I mean, that's what we're saying. So if we know that it means that, then yeah, maybe people can open their mics and call that. I think that would be good. To summarize, I think we've went through the basics as well as to a bit more advanced stuff. I would really love to have a situation where we can combine skill placements into this thing and maybe talk a bit more about experiences on shade placements in a few weeks time. And I've purposefully not really digged into that because that's an entirely different topic on its own. So for now, if we have like key takeaways, one, use your Trail of Anguish aggressively if you can. Don't panic when you're locked down for half a second and the enemy squad is way out of position. Trust your fire red. Use Trail of Anguish aggressive. Start your spike with the F1, F2 to remove Aegis and do a little bit of corrupts up front. The third is to make sure that you hit your targets and you select them properly, which mainly applies. Trust your fire. Yeah, we should. I mean, I don't always trust it either. I sometimes in Shinko's squad, so he's sometimes it's a bit difficult to get stability from him. He also always wants gold for it, but that's true. But the third one after Trail of Anguish, aggressive use and shade usage is to select targets, and then the fourth is do the callouts. And I think if we can start doing that, we'll really up our game as Scourges. Are there any questions? Eva, I'm aware you cannot type into game, but if you I can't look into Discord, so just pop me a message afterwards or something if you have a question or on something. Okay. If there are no further questions, then I would say let's put it to practice a bit on an open tag of Shinko, right?